Pretend you own me tonight, she begged. Barmaid grabbed Mafia boss as killers surrounded her. The smell of stale beer and regret clung to the air in the rusty nail, thick as the grime on the windows. For Delia, it was the scent of her late 20s, a perfume she couldn't wash off, even after a scalding shower. She was halfway through a double shift, her feet throbbing in worn-out sneakers, the ache radiating up her calves. This was her life, slinging drinks in a run-down bar owned by Artie, a man whose smile never reached his eyes and whose connections to the city's underbelly were the worst-kept secret on the block. The bar was a hole-in-the-wall joint, wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up laundromat. It was the kind of place men came to forget, or to be forgotten. Tonight, it was quiet. Just a few regulars nursing their poisons, the glow of the digital lottery sign casting a sickly green light on their faces. Delia was running low on clean glasses. With a weary sigh, she grabbed the plastic tub and pushed through the swinging door to the back room, which doubled as Artie's office and the liquor storeroom. The door to the office itself was usually locked tight, but tonight, it was cracked open just enough for a sliver of yellow light and a low murmur of voices to escape. She froze. Artie never had meetings this late, not unless it was serious. She tried to be quiet, stacking the glasses in the wash basin. The sound of the running water, a poor cover for the conversation happening less than 10 feet away. The arrangement is simple, a voice said, one she didn't recognize. It was smooth, but with a gravelly edge, like stones rolling in a riverbed. We provide the product. Your boys handle the local distribution. Artie gets his cut for the storage. And the cops? That was Mickey, one of Artie's usual low-level associates, his voice high and nervous. The cops are handled. A third voice, colder and heavier, cut in. This one sounded like Syndicate, the real deal. We have eyes where we need them. This drive. There was a soft thud as something small was placed on the desk. Proves it. Delia's curiosity warred with the primal instinct screaming at her to leave. She edged closer to the sink, straining to hear. That's the whole ledger? Mickey asked, his voice hushed in awe. Not just the ledger, the cold voice replied. Financials, shipping routes, payroll and insurance, video files, everything that keeps our political friends in line. You just worry about the cash and the product. Delia leaned, just an inch, trying to see through the crack. She saw 3 men, Mickey, looking pale and sweaty, a younger man in a flashy jacket, jittery and tense, and a third man, older in a dark suit, his back to her. He was the one who scared her. He radiated a stillness that was more dangerous than Mickey's nervous energy. On the desk between them, she saw stacks of cash wrapped in plastic, several dense bricks of white powder, and a small, metallic flash drive. She didn't realize she'd stopped breathing. As she shifted her weight, her sneakers squeaked on the damp linoleum. It was the loudest sound in the world. The conversation stopped. Delia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She spun back to the sink, turning the water on full blast, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the soap. Seconds stretched into an agonizing silence, broken only by the rush of the water. Then, the office door swung open. Delia kept her back to him, scrubbing a glass that was already clean. "What are you doing back here?" It was the jittery one in the flashy jacket. She could feel his presence, hot and suspicious. Right behind her, she fumbled the glass, dropping it into the metal sink with a clatter. "Sorry," she stammered, her voice thin. Just washing glasses." "We ran out." She turned slowly, keeping her eyes down, her wet hair sticking to her temples. He was young, maybe 22, but his eyes were ancient, cold and empty. He stared at her, his gaze raking over her cheap black t-shirt and stained apron. He looked from her face to the office door and back again. He knew. "You see something, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice a low, threatening purr. Delia forced a nervous laugh, shaking her head, holding up her soapy hands. "See what? I didn't see anything. I was just washing up. Artie knows I restock when we're slow." His eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. The fear, sharp and metallic, flooded her mouth. He could smell it on her. "Right," he said slowly. He took a step toward her, and she flinched. A cruel smile touched his lips. "Just washing glasses." He lingered for another long moment, memorizing her face. Then, without another word, he turned and went back into the office, pulling the door shut with a definitive click. Delia's legs gave out. She braced herself against the sink, gulping in the damp, mildewed air. Her reflection in the small, cracked mirror above the basin showed a ghost. Pale face, wide, terrified eyes. They were going to kill her. She wasn't a witness to a simple drug deal. She was a witness to the syndicate, to the names, the product, and the drive. She was at a loose end. She fled. Not out the front, but through the rusted metal door at the end of the hall that led to the back alley. The night air was cold, thick with the stench of garbage and urine, a stark contrast to the stuffy bar. She collapsed against the brick wall, her breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. She slid down until she was sitting on the wet pavement, heedless of the filth, her body trembling uncontrollably. Run! The word echoed in her mind. She had to run, flee the city, tonight. But where would she go? She had maybe $300 in tips stuffed in her backpack, a shared apartment with a roommate who barely knew her last name, and no family to call. She was trapped. Running would only confirm their suspicions. Staying was a death sentence. She sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, the alley her only sanctuary, the sounds of the city, a distant siren, a couple arguing, the rumble of a passing truck, feeling like a countdown. She couldn't stay out here. They would come looking for her. The jittery man would tell the others. They would check the alley, with a surge of adrenaline-fueled despair. She pushed herself to her feet. She had to go back in. She had to pretend, act normal, finish her shift, get her tips, and then disappear. It was a flimsy plan, but it was the only one she had. She wiped her tear-streaked face on the sleeve of her shirt and pushed the heavy door open, slipping back into the hallway. The back room was empty. The office door was closed and locked. They were gone. A small, hysterical bubble of relief rose in her throat, but it died just as quickly. They were gone, but they knew her face. She walked back into the bar, her legs feeling like hollow tubes. The few regulars didn't look up. She grabbed a rag and started wiping down the bar, her hands still shaking, her eyes glued to the front door, dreading every time the bell chimed. An hour passed, then 2. Each minute was a lifetime of suspense. Artie had disappeared, likely with the men. She was alone. At 11:30, the bell chimed again. Delia's head snapped up, her heart seizing. But it wasn't them. It was one man, and he was nothing like the others. He was tall, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than her last 6 months' rent. His hair was black, cut short. His face was all hard angles and shadow. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom or a penthouse, not a dive like the Rusty Nail. He moved with a quiet, coiled energy, his stillness more profound than the bar's manufactured gloom. He didn't look around. He walked directly to the darkest end of the bar, far from the door and the lottery machine, and sat down. Delia picked up a glass, her hands steadier now, replaced by a different kind of nervous energy. This man wasn't a threat, not in the same way, but he was power. It rolled off him in invisible waves. She walked over. "What can I get you?" He didn't look at her immediately. He was studying the grain of the warped wood bar top. Then his eyes lifted, and Delia felt the air leave her lungs. They were dark, almost black, and utterly unreadable. He wasn't just looking at her, he was cataloging her. The exhaustion, the fear, the cheap uniform. "Whiskey," he said. His voice was low, a rumble of gravel. "Neat." She nodded, her throat dry. She poured the bar's best, which wasn't saying much, and set it down in front of him on a small, damp napkin. He paid with a crisp $50 bill, gesturing for her to keep the change. He was nursing the drink, holding the glass with long, capable fingers. When the bell chimed again, Delia's blood turned to ice. This time, it was them. Not the men from the back room. These were the men you sent to clean up a problem. 2 of them. They wore dark jeans and heavy jackets, practical and grim. They didn't scan the room, their eyes, flat and dead as stones, found her instantly. The bar patrons were too drunk or too weary to notice the shift in the atmosphere, but Delia felt it. The air crackled. The temperature dropped. This was it. They weren't here to talk. They were here to take her out the back door and put a bullet in her head. The man in the suit hadn't moved. He was staring into his glass, seemingly unaware. The 2 killers took a step toward the bar. Delia's mind went blank with panic. There was no escape. The back door led to the alley. The front door was blocked by them. Her gaze flew from the killers to the man in the suit. He was her only chance. A 1 in a million. Insane. Suicidal chance. He was a syndicate. She could feel it. But was he their syndicate? She didn't have time to weigh the odds. She moved. In 3 fast, desperate steps, she was beside him. He looked up, his dark eyes finally registering surprise, a flicker of annoyance at having his quiet interrupted. She grabbed his hand. It was strong, warm, and steady. The killers were only yards away. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. The word ripped from her throat. "They're here to kill me. Please, just for a minute. Pretend you own me tonight." The man, Vincent Romano, though she didn't know his name, looked terrified, pleading face to the 2 men advancing on them. His eyes, which had been unreadable, sharpened with comprehension. He processed the threat, her desperation, and the entire tactical situation in less than a second. There was no hesitation, no debate. Without missing a beat, his expression hardening into a mask of cold possession, he acted. His left arm, a band of iron, snaked around her waist. He pulled hard. Delia cried out as she was hauled off her feet and onto his lap, her apron bunching, her body crashing against the solid wall of his chest. He smelled like expensive wool, soap, and something faintly metallic. His grip was proprietary, bruising. "Then you're mine," he murmured, his voice a low, protective growl against her ear, the vibration sending a shiver through her entire body. "Don't move." The 2 killers froze. They had been advancing on nobody, a barmaid. They were now standing in front of Vincent Romano, the head of the Romano family, who had his arm wrapped tightly around the woman they were sent to eliminate. The world tilted, the men's expressions, once flat and confident, flickered with uncertainty, then dawning horror. They recognized him. Everyone in their world recognized him. To touch a man's property was a declaration of war, and this man, holding the shaking woman on his lap, was not someone you went to war with lightly. One of the men, the taller one, slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised his hands halfway, a gesture of peace, of apology. "Mr. Romano," he said, his voice strained. "We didn't know. Our apologies. We were misinformed." Vincent stared at them, his face carved from stone. He didn't acknowledge the apology. He just held Delia tighter, his thumb rubbing a small, firm circle on her hip, a gesture that was both reassuring and a stark statement of ownership. "Get out," Vincent said. It wasn't a yell. It was a quiet, lethal command. The 2 men didn't need to be told twice. They backed away, their eyes never leaving Romano, and then turned and fled the bar, the bell chiming mockingly behind them. The bar was silent, save for the hum of the beer cooler. Delia was trembling so hard she thought she might vibrate apart. She was still perched on his lap, her hands pressed against his chest, feeling the steady, slow beat of his heart beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. He didn't let her go, not for a long time. He just held her, his grip unyielding, letting her ragged breaths fill the silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice still low and close to her ear. "Are there more?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice muffled against his suit. He slid off the bar stool, lifting her with him, setting her on her feet but never releasing his grip on her waist. His other hand went to the small of her back. "We're leaving," he said. He dropped the $50 bill on the bar, which still sat next to his untouched drink. He didn't look at the other patrons. He propelled Delia toward the front door, his body a shield, his presence clearing a path that no one dared to block. The cold night air hit them, and Delia gasped, her lungs finally filling. He didn't stop. He guided her past the front of the bar into the shadows of the side street where a sleek, black sedan waited, its lines as sharp and severe as his own. He opened the passenger door, his hand still firm on her back. She hesitated, her body frozen between the danger she'd just escaped and the new, unknown danger in front of her. "Get in," he commanded. It wasn't a request. Delia scrambled into the plush leather seat. He closed the door and circled the car, sliding into the driver's seat. The interior was dark, quiet, and smelled of new leather. He started the engine, a low, powerful purr, but he didn't drive. He turned to her. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, his face was all planes and angles, his dark eyes intense, the silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. "You have until we reach the bridge to tell me why 2 cartel cleaners just tried to grab you from a dive bar," he said, his voice flat, demanding. "Start talking." Delia stared at him, her mind racing. She'd been saved, but she was not safe. She had just traded one cage for another, this one far more gilded and infinitely more dangerous. "I can't," she stammered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a bone-deep chill. "I didn't see anything, I swear." She avoided the details, terrified. This man was part of that world. What if he was part of the same syndicate? What if she had just jumped from the hands of the soldiers into the lap of their king? Vincent Romano watched her, his expression unreadable, his stillness a terrifying counterpoint to her frantic energy. He put the car in gear and pulled smoothly away from the curb, a predator claiming his new, unexpected prize, driving her into a night that was only just beginning. The city blurred into streaks of neon and rain-slicked asphalt as Vincent Romano drove. The silence inside the luxury sedan was heavier than the humidity outside. Delia sat pressed against the passenger door, her fingers white-knuckled around the strap of her bag, her eyes darting to the side mirrors every few seconds. She expected headlights to swarm them, tires to screech, gunfire to shatter the glass, but there was only the low, steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers. Vincent did not speak. He drove with an easy, terrifying confidence, one hand resting casually on the wheel, the other near the gear shift. He checked his mirrors, not with fear, but with the cold calculation of a man who knew exactly what he was looking for. They left the grimy streets of the lower district behind, climbing toward the skyline where the buildings were taller, the lights brighter, and the shadows much more expensive. He pulled the car into the underground garage of a sleek, high-rise building that looked like a needle of glass piercing the night sky. He swiped a keycard at the gate, the metal barrier lifting silently. "Where are we?" Delia asked, her voice small in the cavernous concrete garage. "Somewhere they are not," Vincent replied. It was the first thing he had said in 20 minutes. He parked in a reserved spot tucked away in a corner, shielded by a concrete pillar. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned to her, the dashboard lights casting shadows across the sharp planes of his face. "Upstairs," he commanded. "Do not touch anything. Do not open the curtains. Do not go near the windows." Delia nodded, too exhausted to argue. She followed him to a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The space was vast, modern, and completely soulless. It was decorated in shades of charcoal and slate, with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. It was a place to exist, not to live, a safe house. Vincent locked the heavy steel door behind them, throwing 3 separate deadbolts. He took off his suit jacket, draping it precisely over the back of a leather armchair, and loosened his tie. The casual action made him seem even more dangerous, stripping away the veneer of the civilized businessman to reveal the predator beneath. He walked to a wet bar in the corner, poured 2 glasses of water, and set one down on the marble island in the center of the kitchen. He pointed to a bar stool. "Sit," he said. Delia sat. She felt dirty in her stained work clothes, a smudge of grease on her arm, her hair a tangled mess. She took a sip of the water. Her hands were shaking so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim. Vincent leaned against the counter opposite her, crossing his arms over his chest. "Start talking. Who were those men?" Delia stared into her glass. The image of the man in the flashy jacket, the cold voice discussing the drive, the look on the cleaner's face, it all swirled in her mind like a nightmare. "I told you," she whispered. "I didn't know them." "You are lying," Vincent said calmly. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Cleaners like that do not walk into a bar like the Rusty Nail to shake down a waitress for tips. They were there to erase you. Why?" Delia looked up at him then. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with red, filled with a desperate, cornered fear. "I saw a meeting, in the back room. Men with money, drugs, and a drive." Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who was in the meeting?" "I don't know their names." She lied quickly. She couldn't tell him. If she told him it was the syndicate, and he was part of the syndicate, she was dead right here in this kitchen. Just guys, bad guys. Vincent studied her for a long moment. He saw the hesitation, the terror that prevented her from speaking the full truth. He pushed off the counter and walked to the wall where a sleek intercom system was mounted. He pressed a button. "Luca," he said to the speaker. "Boss." A voice crackled back instantly. "I need the security feeds from the Rusty Nail, interior and exterior. Last 3 hours. I want to know every face that walks in or out of that door." "On it," the voice replied. Vincent turned back to her. "We will see who these nameless men are soon enough." Delia felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. If he saw the footage, he might recognize the men. He might realize how deep in she really was. "You can't," she said, standing up abruptly. Her legs felt weak. "You have to let me go. I can't be here. If they find out I'm with you—" "If you leave this apartment," Vincent cut her off, his voice dropping an octave, "you will be dead before you reach the street corner. Those men backed off because of me, because they thought you belonged to me. The moment you step out of my shadow, you are fair game." "I never asked for your shadow," Delia snapped. The stress was fraying her nerves, turning her fear into irrational anger. "I asked for 5 minutes. I asked you to pretend." "And I'm still pretending," Vincent said, his voice hard. "Because if I stop, you die. Is that what you want? You want to go back to that alley?" "I want my life back," she shouted, the tears finally spilling over. She paced the length of the kitchen, her sneakers squeaking on the expensive tile. "I want to go home. I want to forget I ever saw that stupid room." "But you did see it," Vincent said. He wasn't yelling. He was agonizingly calm. "And now you are in my house, drinking my water, breathing air that I provide because you were smart enough to grab the one man in that city who could stop a bullet with his name. Do not confuse your survival with a trap. Delia." She stopped pacing and looked at him. He knew her name. She hadn't told him. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. "I know everything that happens in my territory," he said, "even in dumps like the Rusty Nail." The adrenaline that had been sustaining her suddenly evaporated. The fight went out of her legs. She swayed, the room tilting dangerously. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself, a sob ripping from her throat. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath for hours and finally let go. She crumbled. She slid down the side of the cabinetry to the floor, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, racking sobs. Vincent watched her. He was a man who dealt in control, in leverage, in stoicism. Tears were usually a tool used by people who wanted something from him, but this was different. This was the sheer, unadulterated weight of terror crashing down on a woman who had no armor. He moved. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and crouched in front of her. He didn't touch her at first. He just occupied the space, blocking out the empty room, forcing her world to narrow down to just him. "Breathe," he ordered quietly. Delia couldn't. She was gasping, hyperventilating, the panic attack closing her throat. Vincent reached out. He took her wrists, pulling her hands away from her face. His grip was firm, grounding. "Look at me." She shook her head, eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Delia, look at me." She opened her eyes. His face was close, his dark eyes intense and demanding. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering strength. He was a solid rock in the middle of the ocean she was drowning in. "You are alive," he said, spacing the words out. "You are here. You are safe." Something in his voice broke through the haze. The heat of his hands on her wrists was the only real thing in the world. The terrifying distance between them, the mafia boss and the barmaid, suddenly felt non-existent. They were just two people on a kitchen floor, the air charged with the electricity of near death. Delia looked at him, really looked at him. He had saved her. When everyone else had looked away or hunted her, he had claimed her. A surge of emotion, complex and overwhelming, flooded her chest. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also a desperate need for connection, for proof that she was still a living, feeling creature and not just a target. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she couldn't name, she leaned forward. She freed one hand from his grip and reached out, her trembling fingers brushing the sharp line of his jaw. Vincent went still. He didn't pull away, but his eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide. "Delia," he warned, his voice a rumble in his chest. She didn't listen. She closed the distance and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a graceful kiss. It was salty with tears, desperate, a collision of mouths born from fear and the need to feel something other than terror. She pressed against him, seeking his warmth, seeking his life force, for a heartbeat. Vincent did not move. Then a low sound broke from his throat. Half groan, half growl, his control snapped. He didn't push her away. He took over. One of his hands tangled into the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head back, angling her for better access. The other arm wrapped around her waist, crushing her against him, lifting her slightly off the floor so she was draped over his thigh. He kissed her back, and it was nothing like her desperate peck. His kiss was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly thorough. He tasted whiskey and danger. He devoured her, his lips moving with a firm, commanding pressure that demanded a response. It was a kiss that said, "I have you. I have all of you." Delia gasped against his mouth, her hands clutching the lapels of his shirt. The fear was still there, but it was being transmuted into heat, into a fire that burned away the cold numbness of the night. He pulled back an inch, their breaths mingling in the quiet kitchen. His eyes were hooded, burning with a dark intensity that made her knees weak. "You realize," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip, "that once we start this, there is no going back to pretending." "I don't want to pretend," she whispered, the truth of it surprising her. "Make me forget. Please, just make me forget." Vincent stood, pulling her up with him effortlessly. He didn't carry her to the bedroom. He simply walked her backward until she was pressed against the marble island. He lifted her onto the counter, stepping between her legs, his presence overwhelming. His hands roamed over her, not with the frantic energy of a boy, but with the slow, possessive exploration of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. He traced the curve of her waist, the line of her hip, his touch searing through her clothes. Every place he touched felt branded. When he kissed her again, it was deeper, hungrier. Delia wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer, needing the friction, the weight of him to ground her. The danger outside the walls ceased to exist. There was only this room, this man, and the heavy, intoxicating rhythm of their breathing. He held her like she was something fragile that he intended to keep, his hands strong and protective even as they roamed her body. It was a passionate exorcism of the night's violence, replaced by a different kind of intensity, one that promised safety, possession, and a terrifyingly addictive pleasure. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, sharp and unforgiving. Delia woke slowly, the events of the previous night crashing into her mind before she even opened her eyes. She was in bed, a massive bed with sheets that felt like silk, and she was not alone. A heavy arm was draped over her waist, anchoring her to the mattress. She could feel the steady rise and fall of a chest against her back. Vincent. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, bathed in a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. It was warm, it was quiet. No sirens, no shouting neighbors, no fear of eviction, just the solid weight of the man sleeping behind her. Then, the guilt hit her like a physical blow. She turned her head slightly. Vincent was asleep. His face relaxed in a way it hadn't been the night before. He looked younger, less severe, but even in sleep, his hand held her with a possessive grip. She had dragged him into this. He was a powerful man, yes, but the people she saw, the syndicate, the corrupt cops, they were monsters. By bringing her here, by touching her, he had painted a target on his own back. If they found her, they would come for him too. She carefully tried to inch away, to slide out from under his arm. His arm tightened instantly. Going somewhere? His voice was rough with sleep, but completely alert. There was no transition period for him. He went from asleep to awake in a microsecond. Delia froze. "I need to use the bathroom." Vincent opened his eyes. They were clear and sharp. He released her, but he didn't look away as she sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. She felt exposed. Not just physically, but emotionally. The intimacy of the night before hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. "Stop thinking so loud," he said, sitting up and leaning back against the headboard, the sheet pulled at his waist, revealing the lean, scarred muscle of his torso. "I put you in danger," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you've walked into." "I walked into a bar," Vincent corrected. "Everything after that was my choice. But you don't understand. I understand that you are trying to run again." He interrupted. He reached out, grabbing her hand where it rested on the mattress. He pulled her slightly back toward him. "Listen to me carefully. Delia, you are under my protection now. That means your problems are my problems, whether you like it or not." "Why?" she asked, searching his face. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Vincent looked at her, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. A flicker of the heat from last night passed through his expression. "You stopped being a stranger the moment you climbed into my lap," he said softly. A chime from the other room broke the moment. It was the intercom. Vincent's face hardened instantly. The lover vanished. The boss returned. He let go of her hand and got out of bed, pulling on a pair of dark lounge pants. "Stay here," he ordered. He walked out into the living area. Delia quickly scrambled out of bed, finding a heavy robe in the closet that swallowed her whole. She followed him, staying in the shadows of the hallway. She watched as Vincent walked to the wall monitor. "Report," he said. "We have the footage." "Boss?" Luca's voice came through, grim and serious. "And you're not gonna like it. Send it to the main screen." The large television on the wall flickered to life. It showed a grainy, black and white view of the rusty nail. Delia crept closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity. On the screen, she saw herself behind the bar. She saw the jittery man in the flashy jacket come out of the office. She watched herself flee to the alley. Then, the footage switched to the exterior camera. A black SUV pulled up. The two men who had entered the bar, the cleaners, stepped out. But they weren't alone. A third man got out of the driver's seat. He was dressed in a police uniform. Delia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Vincent went rigid. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Rewind," Vincent commanded. "Pause on the cop." The image froze. The face was grainy, but the badge was visible. And the face was familiar. He was a high-ranking lieutenant from the city's organized crime division. A man who was supposed to be putting people like the cleaners in jail, not driving them to hits. "It's confirmed," Luca said over the intercom. "The order came from the top. They weren't just sending a message. Boss, it was a liquidation order. And since you walked out with the package, the order is now on both of you." Vincent stared at the image of the corrupt cop, then turned slowly to look at where Delia was standing in the hallway. His eyes were dark, furious, and terrifyingly resolved. "It seems," he said, his voice low and deadly, "that we have a war to fight." Delia shivered, pulling the robe tighter. There was no running now. The camera proved it. She was marked for death, and the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave was the man standing in the center of the room, a man she had kissed, a man she had dragged into hell, a man who was now the only owner she would ever accept. The penthouse, once a silent sanctuary, was now a command center. For hours. Vincent had been on the phone, his voice a low, commanding monotone that betrayed no emotion. He stood before the wall of windows, not looking at the view, but staring into the reflection of the room as he spoke into his phone, dismantling the lives of the men who had threatened him. Delia sat on the sofa, wrapped in the silk robe, legs tucked beneath her. She had showered, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of being hunted. She watched him. A man who moved mountains with a handful of words. He spoke of shipment manifests, police precincts, and a cartel she had only ever heard of in movies, the San Esteban cartel. Not a major player, but a vicious one, known for its brutality and its deep ties to corrupt city officials. The picture he was painting was terrifying. The men in the back room of the Rusty Nail were not just local thugs. They were the bridge between the cartel's product and the city's dirty cops. And she had stumbled right into the middle of it. After a final, curt command, Vincent ended the call and placed his phone on the counter. The silence that fell was heavy, charged with unspoken truths. "They are mid-level," he said, turning to face her. "Ambitious. The cartel provides the product. The dirty cops, led by Lieutenant Hayes, the man on the camera, provide the protection and routes. They were using your boss, Artie, to launder the cash." Delia's stomach twisted. "I think I have something that belongs to them." Vincent's gaze sharpened. He crossed the room and sat in the armchair opposite her. His posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. "You said you saw a drive." "I didn't just see it," she whispered, her hands knotting in the robe. "I have it." If Vincent was surprised, he didn't show it. He simply waited. "It was in the money bag," she explained, the words tumbling out. "The one Mickey, Artie's man, was showing them. After they left, I panicked. Artie always kept a separate bag of cash in the office safe. I thought Mickey had left it on the desk by mistake. I was going to put it back. I grabbed it, and when I heard them coming back, I just shoved it in my backpack." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I didn't even know the flash drive was in it until I got to the alley. I was looking for my tip money to see how far I could run. I felt it at the bottom of the bag. I didn't know what it was." "Not really, not until you said, videos," Vincent finished for her, his voice grim. "Execution files, financial trails, everything they use to keep their political puppets in line. It's not just a ledger. Delia, it's their leash, and you stole it." "I didn't mean to," she cried, standing up. "It was an accident. I thought it was just cash." "It doesn't matter," Vincent said, his voice cutting through her panic. He stood as well, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall. "They will not stop. They cannot stop. That drive is their entire operation. They will tear this city apart to get it back. Then we have to give it back," she said, desperate. "We can leave it somewhere. Tell them where it is. And what happens the moment they have it," he countered, his voice dangerously soft. "They have no more reason to keep you alive, and no more reason to fear me. Right now, that drive is the only thing keeping you breathing. It's leverage." He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see straight through her. "Where is it?" "My apartment," she whispered. "In my backpack. I hid it under the floorboard in my closet, the one that's always loose." Vincent nodded once. A decision was made. "Get dressed. Wear the clothes you came in with." "What? We can't go there. They'll be watching it. They have to be." "They will be," he agreed. "But they'll be watching for you. A barmaid, scared and on the run. They won't be watching for me." He went to a closet by the door and opened it. It was not filled with clothes, but with weapons. He pulled out a sleek, black handgun, checked the magazine, and tucked it into a holster at the small of his back, concealing it perfectly beneath a dark button-down shirt he pulled on. He passed her the worn black t-shirt and jeans she had arrived in. "We go in, we get the drive, and we disappear," he said, this time for good. The drive to her apartment was the longest 30 minutes of Delia's life. The black sedan moved through traffic like a shark, silent and purposeful. Vincent drove with one hand, his other resting on his thigh, his gaze constantly moving, checking every car, every pedestrian, every reflection in the shop windows. Delia's neighborhood looked alien. The familiar, rundown tenement buildings suddenly looming like prisons. "They'll see the car," she said, her voice strained. "We're not parking at the front." Vincent turned down a narrow, garbage-strewn alley 3 blocks away from her building. He pulled into the back of a dilapidated garage, the door groaning shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness. "We go on foot from here," he said. "Stay 2 steps behind me. Do not talk. Do not look at anyone. If I tell you to run, you run. You do not look back. Understood?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart hammering. They moved through the back alleys, a maze of brick and fire escapes. Vincent moved with a fluid, silent grace that was terrifying. He was a ghost in his own city. He led her into the back entrance of her building, the lock on the steel door clicking open with a small tool he produced from his pocket. The hallway smelled of cabbage and dust. It was her home. It felt like a trap. They climbed the 5 flights of stairs, their footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum. Her apartment was at the end of the hall. Apartment 5. B. Vincent put a hand on her arm, stopping her before the door. He listened. Silence. He gestured to her. "Your key," slowly. She fumbled in her backpack, her shaking fingers finally closing around the cold metal. She handed it to him. He inserted it into the lock, turning it with excruciating slowness. The click of the deadbolt retracting sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hall. Vincent pushed the door open an inch. He waited. Nothing. He pushed it open wider, his hand disappearing to the small of his back. He stepped inside, sweeping the tiny entryway with his gaze. Delia followed, her breath held in her chest. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Her roommate's dirty dishes were in the sink. A stack of mail was on the cheap particle board table. It was small, cramped, and blessedly normal. "The closet," Vincent murmured. She led him into her bedroom, a room barely big enough for her mattress and a small dresser. She knelt by the closet, her fingers finding the loose floorboard. "Hurry," Vincent said, his voice tight. He was standing by the bedroom door, looking back into the living room. Delia pried the board up. Her backpack was still there. She reached inside, her fingers brushing the small, cold, metallic shape. She had it. "Got it," she said, relief flooding her. It was at that exact moment that the front door of the apartment slammed open. "Police! Hands in the air!" Delia screamed. 2 men in tactical gear, not uniforms, burst in. They weren't cops. They were a cartel. Vincent moved. He was a blur of motion. He didn't raise his hands. He grabbed Delia, yanking her back, throwing her behind the mattress. He upended with one powerful kick. "Stay down," he roared. The first man through the door raised his rifle. Vincent was faster. The sound of his handgun was deafening in the tiny room. A sharp, contained crack. Crack. The first man crumpled, a look of surprise on his face. The second man, seeing his partner fall, fired a wild burst from his automatic weapon, the bullets tearing through the plaster of the wall where Vincent had been a second before. Delia cowered behind the mattress, her hands over her head, her eyes squeezed shut. The noise was overwhelming, the smell of gunpowder acrid and choking. Vincent had moved to the side of the doorway. He waited. The second man, breathing heavily, stepped into the room to get a clear shot. Vincent fired once. The man fell backward into the hallway, his weapon clattering on the floor. Silence. A terrible, ringing silence. "Are you hurt?" Vincent's voice was harsh, strained. Delia couldn't speak. She just shook her head, her body trembling violently. "We're leaving, now!" He grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. He didn't let her look at the man in her bedroom. He pushed her out into the hall, past the second body. Delia saw a smear of blood on the faded wallpaper. She felt a splash of something wet and warm on her cheek. They didn't take the stairs. Vincent shoved her through the fire escape window at the end of the hall. "Go! Go! Go!" They clattered down the metal steps, the sound echoing through the alley. They ran. Vincent's hand locked on her wrist, pulling her along. They didn't stop until they were back in the garage, the door slamming shut, sealing them in the darkness. Delia collapsed against the cold metal of the car, gasping for air, her lungs burning. Vincent started the engine, the headlights flashing on, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He got out and came to her side, his face a grim mask in the harsh light. "You're safe," he said. That was when she broke. The tears came, hot and acidic. She lunged at him, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in his shirt. She clung to him, not in passion but in sheer, primal terror. "It's my fault," she sobbed, her words muffled. "They're dead, because of me. I'm a burden. I'm just bringing you death." Vincent's arms came around her, his hold as solid as the concrete walls. He held her, letting her tremble, his hand stroking her hair. "You are not a burden," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You are mine. I protect what is mine." He held her until the shaking subsided, then he gently peeled her away from him. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. His gaze fell on the small, red splatter on her cheek. His expression hardened. He took a clean handkerchief from his pocket, dipped it in a bottle of water from the car, and very, very gently wiped the blood from her skin. His touch was impossibly tender. "You are not alone in this anymore, Delia," he said, his dark eyes holding hers. "They wanted a war. They will get one." He drove them across the city, not to the penthouse, but to a vast, dark warehouse in the industrial district, inside. It was cavernous, filled with crates and the smell of oil and steel. In the corner, a small, functional living space had been built, a bed, a kitchen, a solid steel door, another safe house. Grittier, more defensible. That night, they didn't talk. The violence of the day hung between them, a tangible thing. Delia was shaken to her core. The image of the man falling in her bedroom burned into her mind. She lay on the simple cot, her back to him, staring at the concrete wall. She felt him lie down behind her, the mattress dipping with his weight. He didn't touch her, just let his presence be known. "I can't sleep," she whispered into the darkness. "I know," he replied, his voice a low rumble. She felt him shift, his hand, warm and calloused, settled on her hip. It wasn't sexual. It was grounding. It was a promise. She turned over slowly to face him. In the dim light from the single security lamp outside, she could just make out his features. "I was so scared," she said. "You were brave," he corrected her. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch feather-light. Last night, their intimacy had been a desperate, frantic collision, an escape from fear. Tonight, it was something else entirely. It was slow, it was deliberate. He leaned in and kissed her, his lips soft, questioning. It wasn't the kiss of a man taking control, but of a man asking for permission. She responded, her lips parting, a small sigh escaping her. His hands began to explore her, not with the rushed hunger of before, but with a slow, careful reverence. He learned the shape of her, the curve of her waist, the jut of her hip bone, the scar on her shoulder. His touch was a question, and her skin was the answer. He held her face, kissing her eyelids, her temples, the corner of her mouth, as if memorizing her. Delia felt the tension of the day melt away under his hands. This was not about forgetting. This was about being found. He held her as if she were precious, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. She arched into his touch, her body responding naturally, the fear replaced by a deep, aching need to be closer, to be held, to be truly seen. He moved over her, his weight a comfort, his movements sure and patient, their bodies fitting together not in a frantic clash, but in a slow, deep, and trusting union. Afterward, he held her, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. She listened to the steady, strong beat of his heart, the sound a reassurance that they were both still alive. "I won't let anything happen to you," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick. "They will never touch you again. You belong with me now. Delia, do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes drifting shut, a sense of safety she had never known settling over her. "I understand." As she finally slipped into a fitful sleep, Vincent's phone vibrated on the table beside the bed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. It was a message from Luca. Rivaldi is asking questions. He knows about the girl. Says you're bringing cartel heat on the family for nobody. He's not happy. Boss?" Vincent deleted the message. He looked down at the woman sleeping in his arms, a fierce, protective anger burning in his chest. Delia wasn't a nobody. She was his, and he would burn his whole world down to keep her safe. The warehouse was a cold, concrete tomb. They had been holed up for 2 days, and the air had grown thick with unspoken fear and the metallic scent of Vincent's guns, which he meticulously cleaned and oiled on a steel workbench. The only connection to the outside world was his phone, a device that had become a source of constant, simmering anger. Delia sat on the cot, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching him. He was pacing, the phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, controlled snarl. "That is not a request, Rivaldi. It is an order," Vincent said. Delia flinched. She had learned his rival's name from the hushed, urgent conversations he had with Luca, his most trusted man. Rivaldi was his underboss, a man with ambition and a clear disdain for Vincent's recent distraction. "I don't care what it looks like," Vincent continued, his back to her. "The family is not exposed. I am handling this." A tinny, enraged voice crackled from the phone, loud enough for Delia to hear the tone, if not the words. "You are handling nothing," Rivaldi's voice suddenly shouted, clear in the quiet warehouse. "You are hiding in a hole with a barmaid. You've brought cartel heat and a dozen dirty cops down on our entire operation because you couldn't keep your pants zipped. The capos are unhappy. Vincent, they see this as a liability. They see her as a liability. End it. Give her up. Let the cartel have her. It's a clean cut." Delia's blood ran cold. She felt the blanket, but it offered no warmth. Vincent was silent for a long moment, his shoulders rigid. "You are questioning my command, Rivaldi?" "I'm questioning your judgment," Rivaldi shot back. "This is business. She is not—" "End her, or we will—" The line went dead. Vincent had hung up. He stood perfectly still, his hand clenched around the phone so tightly his knuckles were white. He did not turn. He did not speak. He just stared at the concrete wall. Delia's heart, which had been a frantic bird, suddenly felt like a stone. "She is not." The words echoed in her mind. He was right. She was a barmaid. Nobody. And she was going to get this man, the only person who had ever protected her, killed. She was the liability. She was the one bringing the entire organization down on his head. She watched him, her chest aching. He was powerful. Yes, but even he could not fight his own family and a cartel and the police all at once. She was his weak spot. And Rivaldi, a man she had never even seen, knew it. She made her decision. It was the only one she could make. She waited. Hours passed. Luca arrived with supplies, spoke in low tones with Vincent about the upcoming meeting, and left. The warehouse grew dark, the only light coming from the single lamp on the workbench. Vincent eventually sat in a chair, the flash drive she had given him in his hand, turning it over and over. He looked at it as if it were a bomb. He didn't sleep. He closed his eyes, his breathing evening out, but Delia knew he was not asleep. He was a predator at rest, every muscle coiled. She waited until the first hint of gray light, the pre-dawn glow that signaled the changing of the guard, the moment when the night was at its weakest. She slipped off the cot, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete. Her clothes were folded on a crate. She pulled on her jeans and the worn t-shirt, her hands shaking so violently she could barely button the denim. Her sneakers, still damp from the alley, were by the door. She grabbed them, her heart in her throat. She looked back at Vincent. He hadn't moved. His face, in the dim light, was etched with a deep weariness she hadn't seen before. The weight of his world, and now hers, was crushing him. "I can't be your burden," she thought, the words a painful prayer. "I can't be the reason you die." She padded to the massive steel door. It was a fire exit, her one-way ticket out. She fumbled with the heavy crossbar, her fingers numb. It was stiff, designed not to be opened easily. "Don't!" The voice was ice. Delia froze, her hand still on the bar. She turned. Vincent was standing not 10 feet away, his face a mask of cold, devastating fury. It was not the hot rage of a lesser man. It was the quiet, absolute anger of a king who had just been betrayed. "You really think that little of me?" he asked, his voice soft, which was so much worse than a yell. "You think, after everything, you can just walk out that door? I heard your call," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "With Rivaldi, I'm a liability. Vincent. I'm gonna get you killed. They're right, it's business." "You are not business," he bit out, done advancing on her. Delia backed away until her shoulders hit the cold steel of the door. I'm nobody. I'm the barmaid. Let me go. If I'm gone, they have no reason to come after you. You can tell them I ran, that you let me go." He was in front of her now, caging her in against the door, his hands planted on the metal on either side of her head. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And where will you go, Delia?" he demanded. "Back to your apartment." "Oh, wait, it's a kill zone. To the police. They're the ones driving the hit squads. You will not last 5 minutes. You will be dead before the sun is up." "Is that what you want?" "It's better than you dying for me," she cried. "That is my choice," he roared, his control finally snapping, his voice echoing in the vast space. He saw her shiver. The warehouse was frigid, and she was in nothing but a t-shirt. His anger dissolved instantly, replaced by something else, something fiercely protective. He swore under his breath and turned, grabbing his own heavy wool coat from a hook. He came back to her and, in a gesture of agonizing tenderness, wrapped the massive coat around her, pulling the lapels shut. It swallowed her whole, smelling of him, soap, wool, and the faint, cold scent of steel. He gripped the coat, his knuckles brushing her chin. "You still don't trust me," he stated, his voice raw with a disappointment that cut her deeper than his anger. "After all this, you still think running is the answer? I'm trying to save you. By killing yourself, you are not saving me. You are taking away the one thing I am fighting for. Now," he said, his gaze pinning her, "you are going to tell me everything. Not just about the drive. Everything. Why are you so sure you are the one they need to erase? What did you do?" Delia looked into his dark, demanding eyes, and the last of her walls crumbled. The secret she had been holding, the one she thought made her complicit, spilled out. "It wasn't just that I saw the deal," she sobbed, her hands clutching the front of his coat. "It was Artie, my boss. For months, my paychecks were wrong, too high. He said it was back pay, overtime, bonuses. He said I was his best employee, and he was cutting me in on the profits." Vincent's eyes narrowed. He knew this part of the story. "He had me sign things," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. "He said they were inventory forms, payroll reports for the staff, tax documents. I just signed them. I thought I was helping him. I thought he trusted me." She looked up at him, her face a mask of dawning, sickening realization. "They weren't inventory forms, were they? They were invoices," Vincent said, his voice flat and dead. "They were laundering the cartel's money. He wasn't paying you. He was washing the cash through your payroll. Your name, your signature, is on every dirty dollar that passed through that bar for the last 6 months." Delia's legs gave out. Vincent caught her, his arm locking around her waist, holding her up. "I didn't know," she whispered, horrified. "I know," he said, his voice softer now. He finally understood. This changes everything. He guided her to the workbench and sat her on the stool. He stood in front of her, holding the small flash drive between his thumb and forefinger. "I thought this was their only leash," he said. "The videos, the blackmail. I was wrong. This is their insurance. You are their paper trail. You are the loose end that connects the cops to the cartel. They don't just want to silence a witness. Delia, they need to erase the evidence. And you are the evidence." He looked at the driver, then at her. A cold, hard decision settled in his eyes. "So," he said, "we will give them what they want." "What? You're going to give me to them?" "I'm going to destroy their reason for hunting you." He held up the drive. "I am calling a meeting. Tonight, the cartel, Hayes and his dirty cops, and my own ambitious rival. I am bringing them all to one place." "And do what? Give them the drive?" No, Vincent said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. I am going to destroy it right in front of them. I will erase their blackmail material, their leverage, and their entire insurance policy in one move. It will be a declaration of war. It will force every rat, every snake, out into the open. And in that chaos, we disappear. Vincent, that's suicide, she breathed, terrified. They will kill you before you even get the drive out of your pocket. They will be too busy watching each other, he said. It's a risk. But it's the only move we have left that ends with you alive and free. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. He made calls, his voice sharp and coded. He set the time, the place. An abandoned shipyard, neutral ground. He and Luca moved crates, checked sight lines, and planned for a war. Delia was a ghost in his storm. She made coffee she didn't drink. She paced. She watched the man who was planning to walk into a den of lions. All for her. As night fell, a different kind of tension settled in. The preparations were done. All that was left was the waiting. The meeting was at midnight. Vincent was standing by the door, pulling on a dark, heavy sweater. Delia couldn't stand the silence anymore. She walked up to him, her heart in her throat. Vincent, he turned. You should try to sleep. I can't. I have to tell you something. He waited, his face unreadable. I'm scared, she whispered, her hands twisting in front of her. I am terrified of what will happen tonight. Not for me. For you. You're doing all this and She took a shaky breath. I think I'm falling for you, and it's not fair. It's not fair that I'm only realizing it now, when I might lose you before anything even begins. The admission hung in the air, raw and fragile. Vincent stared at her, the armor of the boss cracking, revealing the man beneath. He took a step, then another, until he was in front of her. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. There is no might, he said, his voice low and rough. I am coming back to you. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the kitchen, nor the slow, tender exploration of the safe house. This was something else. It was a kiss of raw, desperate urgency. It was a brand. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her close, his mouth devouring hers. It was the kiss of a man marking his territory, a promise of return. Delia responded with equal fire, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him down to her. This was not about fear. It was about possession. It was about this one last night, this one moment of pure, undiluted connection before the world outside tried to tear them apart. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, their bodies molding together. He carried her to the cot and laid her down, his hands moving over her with a desperate, knowing touch. He was memorizing her. Every word he whispered against her skin was a promise. You are mine. I am yours. I will not leave you. Their bodies moved in a frantic, passionate rhythm, a desperate, silent plea against the coming dawn. They held each other, skin to skin, a shield against the cold and the dark, finding a fierce, vulnerable solace in the eye of the storm. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep into the warehouse, they lay tangled together, the coat he had given her now a blanket over them both. Vincent held her, his lips pressed to her hair. This is the last day, Delia, he murmured, his voice thick with the night's intimacy and the day's resolve. After tonight, this is over. We disappear. Together, I'll sell it all. I'll give it to Rivaldi. I don't care. We just go. Delia closed her eyes, a single tear of hope and fear leaking out. Together. The sound of the steel door groaning open made them both jolt. It was Luca. He wasn't scheduled to be there for another hour. His face was pale, his expression grim. In his hand, he held a small, black and silver disc, caked in mud. Boss, Luca said, his voice strained. I did a final sweep like you asked. I found this on the sedan, tucked up in the rear wheel well. Vincent was out of the bed in an instant, pulling on his pants. He took the device from Luca's hand. A GPS tracker. Delia's blood turned to ice. They had been found. They know we're here, she whispered, horrified. Vincent's eyes were black, unreadable. He looked from the tracker to Luca, then back to the device. "No," he said, his voice a low, lethal growl. "They didn't find us. They were told the tracker wasn't from the cartel. It wasn't from the cops. It was professional. Military grade. The kind his own family used. Someone on the inside. Someone who knew this safe house. Someone who had been in this room. The betrayal was not at the gates. It had been standing beside him all along. The tracker lay on the steel workbench, a tiny, obscene monument to betrayal." Delia stared at it, then at Luca, who was studiously avoiding her gaze. He was checking the seals on a crate of ammunition, his movements just a fraction too precise, too controlled. "Only 3 people knew about this warehouse," Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He was cleaning his handgun, the rhythmic, metallic shing click of the slide, the only sound in the vast, cold space. "Me, you," his eyes flicked to Delia. "And you," he nodded at Luca. Luca's hands stilled. He finally looked up, his face a mask of practiced loyalty. "Boss, you don't think I found it? I brought it to you." "You did," Vincent agreed, setting the gun down. He picked up the tracker. "You brought it to me after it had transmitted our location for 6 hours, after they already knew we were here, a little too late to be useful, just in time to look loyal." "Rivaldi," Luca said, his voice strained. "It has to be Rivaldi. He's been gunning for you. He must have had one of his men plant it." "Rivaldi doesn't know this location," Vincent said flatly. "This is one of my father's places. Only my most trusted men know it. Rivaldi is loud, he's ambitious, but he is not subtle. This," he held up the disc, "is subtle. This is someone who could walk right up to my car, someone who knew I would be here, and someone who knew exactly when to find the evidence to cover his own tracks." Delia watched, her heart hammering. She saw the tiny bead of sweat on Luca's temple. She saw the way his hand twitched toward the gun on his own hip. Vincent saw it too. It was a good plan. "Luca," Vincent continued, his voice almost conversational, "let the cartel and the cops do the dirty work. They kill me. They kill the girl. Rivaldi takes over in the chaos. And what did they promise you? A piece of the new action? The territory Artie was running in?" Luca's composure cracked. He didn't speak. He moved. He was fast, his hand diving for his weapon. But Vincent was a ghost. Before Luca's gun had even cleared its holster, Vincent had crossed the space and slammed Luca's hand against the brick wall. A sickening crack echoed in the warehouse, and Luca screamed, his weapon clattering to the concrete. Vincent spun him around, slamming him back against the wall, his forearm pressed against Luca's throat. Delia cried out, stumbling back. "Who? Luca!" Vincent snarled, his face inches from his betrayers. "Who did you talk to?" I, Luca choked, his face turning purple. "Talk!" Vincent roared, slamming him against the wall again. "Artie!" Luca finally gasped, the name ripping from his throat. It was Artie! Before all this, he was panicking. He knew the cartel was using him as a bridge. He offered me a way out, a way up. He said when they took over, I could have his whole territory. All I had to do was help them clean up the loose ends. "Me?" Delia whispered from across the room. "He meant me. And me," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "The moment I protected her, I became a loose end, too." He shoved Luca away, disgust on his face. Luca collapsed to his knees, clutching his broken hand. "Boss, I'm sorry. They have my sister. They said they would." "Save it," Vincent spat. He looked at Delia, his eyes black and hard. The betrayal had cost him something. The small piece of him that had trusted, that had hoped to just disappear, was gone. Now, there was only the cold, calculating strategist. "The meeting at the shipyard is off," he said to Delia, his voice flat. It was a lie, a trap for him. He jerked his chin at Luca. The real meeting was always going to be somewhere else. He turned back to Luca. "You are going to make one more call. You are going to tell Artie and his cartel friends that I'm moving the girl. You will tell them I'm running. You will give them an address, the old tannery, 9 o'clock. Luca, his face pale with pain and terror, nodded. And then, Vincent said, picking up a set of heavy zip ties, you will pray I am in a merciful mood. He left Luca tied to a steel support beam and grabbed Delia's arm. "We're leaving." "What about him?" she asked, looking back at the whimpering man. "My men will deal with him after they've intercepted the hit squad at the tannery. He's no longer our concern." He didn't take her to the sedan. He took her to an old, battered pickup truck hidden in the back of the warehouse. He drove, not speaking, the grim set of his jaw telling her that the plan had changed, that the stakes had been raised to an impossible height. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small. "To end it," he said. "I tried to be surgical. I tried to cut out the infection, but the rot is too deep. Luca, Rivaldi, Hayes, the cartel, they are all tangled together. The only way to save the body is to burn it all to the ground." He pulled the truck to a stop on a dark, quiet street, 2 blocks away from a towering, Gothic structure, an abandoned church. "St. Michael's, yes," he said. "I sent them all a message an hour ago. A small piece of the video from the drive, just enough to prove I have it. I told them. The cartel, Lieutenant Hayes, and my dear underboss, Rivaldi, midnight, they all show up, or the entire drive goes to the federal prosecutor and the press." "You're bringing them all here?" Delia said, her voice trembling. "Vincent, they will kill each other. They will kill you. That is the point," he said, his face a mask of cold resolve. "I'm forcing the rats into a cage, and I'm locking the door. There is no negotiating. There is only survival." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a small, heavy backpack. "I'm parking across the street, in that grove of trees. You will stay in the truck. You will lock the doors. You will not move, and you will not make a sound." He took her hand, pressing a small, cold burner phone into her palm. "If I am not back by 1 o'clock, you call the single number on this phone. His name is Marcus. He will get you out of the country. You will go, Delia, and you will never, ever look back. Do you understand me?" The finality of it hit her. This was not a plan. It was a suicide mission. "No," she whispered, tears flooding her eyes. She grabbed the front of his shirt. "No, Vincent, please." "Let's just go. Now, we can use the truck. We can just drive. Forget the drive. Forget them. Please, let's just run." He cupped her face, his hands rough, his gaze so intense it burned her. "They will never stop hunting you. Tesoro," he murmured, the Italian endearment slipping out, raw and unguarded. "You will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. You will never be free. This is the only way. I am cutting the cord. Tonight," he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of goodbye. It was hard, final, and tasted of ash and desperation. "I will come back for you," he whispered against her lips. Then he was gone. Delia watched him cross the street, a dark shadow moving toward the looming, skeletal church. He slipped through a side door and disappeared. She was alone. The silence of the truck was deafening. She looked at the clock on the dashboard. 11:55. She watched the church, her body vibrating with terror. A dark sedan pulled up. Lieutenant Hayes, in civilian clothes, came out, looking nervous. Another car, a black SUV, pulled up. 3 men got out, the cartel. One of them built like a mountain, his face scarred. Finally, a third car, Rivaldi, with 2 of his own men, his face arrogant and eager. They all went inside. The church was a black hole, swallowing them all. Delia waited. The clock ticked past midnight, 12:10, 12:20. The silence was impossible. It was a held breath. It was the moment before the lightning strike. She couldn't breathe. Her mind was a slideshow of horrors. Vincent, bleeding on the stone floor, his eyes empty. Vincent, outnumbered. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sit and wait. Her promise to him, his order. It meant nothing against the raw, primal scream in her mind that said he was dying. "I will not let you die alone." At 12:23, a single, sharp crack echoed from the church. A gunshot. It was followed by a brief, terrible silence. Then, the world erupted, a rapid pop-pop-pop of a handgun, answered by the deeper, heavier thud-thud of a different caliber. Then a roar, the sound of an automatic weapon spraying bullets. "Vincent!" Delia screamed his name, but it was lost in the night. She fumbled with the door handle. her orders forgotten, her mind blank with a single, driving purpose. She threw the door open and sprinted. She ran across the empty street, her sneakers slapping the pavement, her lungs on fire. She didn't care about the bullets. She didn't care about the cartel. She burst through the heavy oak doors of the church. The scene was chaotic. Moonlight streamed through a massive, shattered stained glass window, illuminating a war zone. Lieutenant Hayes was cowering behind a toppled row of pews, screaming. Rivaldi was on the steps to the altar, bleeding from his leg, firing wildly at the cartel men. One of his men was dead beside him, and Vincent. He was using a massive stone baptismal font as cover, his gun in hand, exchanging fire with the scarred cartel enforcer, who was shielded by the heavy wooden altar. "Delia, get out! Get out now!" Vincent roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. His shout, his momentary distraction, was all it took. The enforcer, Suarez, stepped out from behind the altar, his aim steady. He fired. The bullet tore through Vincent's side, high on his chest, spinning him around. He grunted in pain, slamming back against the stone font, his gun clattering to the floor. Suarez smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. He stepped forward, raising his weapon for the final, killing shot. "No!" Delia screamed. Vincent slumped against the stone, his face pale with pain, looked up. His eyes were not defeated, they were ice. He had dropped his main weapon, but his hand was not empty. With a sudden, lightning-fast movement, he raised the small backup pistol he kept holstered at his ankle. He fired twice, 2 perfect shots, center mass. Suarez stopped. He looked down at his chest, a look of pure surprise on his face. He stumbled, his gun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling, and then collapsed onto the altar steps. Still. Silence. The only sound was Rivaldi, groaning, and Hayes, sobbing behind the pew. Delia ran. She skidded on the stone floor, falling to her knees beside Vincent. "Vincent! Oh God!" she cried, her hands hovering over the dark, wet stains spreading across his shirt. You're okay. Just stay with me." She pressed her hands to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, the hot, sticky blood covering her fingers. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed, her tears dripping onto his face. "I thought, don't you leave me? Do you hear me, Vincent? You can't leave me. Not now. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you." Vincent's eyes, hazy with pain, focused on her. He managed a weak smile. "Knew you wouldn't listen." In the distance, the wail of sirens began to grow. Not the city cops, a deeper, more powerful siren. Delia's head snapped up. "Cops, they're coming. It's okay," Vincent breathed, his hand, covered in his own blood, finding hers. He gripped it, his strength surprising her. "I called the feds. Anonymous tip rival gangs hostage situation at the church. They're the right kind." The sirens were deafening now. The outside of the church bathed in flashing red and blue lights. Shouts echoed from outside. "FBI! Hands in the air! Come out slowly!" Vincent's eyes never left her face. He held her hand as if it were his only anchor to the world. "I kept my promise. Delia," he murmured, his voice a thread. "It's over." The doors of the church burst open, and a flood of federal agents in full tactical gear swarmed in, their weapons raised. "You're safe," Vincent whispered, his eyes finally closing as the world descended into chaos around them. "You're safe now." The world, which had been a chaotic cacophony of sirens and gunfire, narrowed to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Vincent survived. The bullet had torn through his side, missing his heart but shattering 2 ribs and puncturing a lung. It had been close. Too close. His recovery was not in a hospital. The federal agents had, as Vincent predicted, cleaned up the mess at St. Michael's S. The incident was spun as a major federal sting, a multi-agency operation that had successfully dismantled a corrupt police ring and its cartel associates. Rivaldi, wounded and cornered, had eagerly turned informant. Lieutenant Hayes had confessed to everything, the flash drive, which Delia had pulled from Vincent's pocket as paramedics worked on him, was anonymously delivered to the lead FBI agent, sealing the case. Vincent Romano, officially, was listed as a civilian bystander caught in the crossfire, an innocent victim. The moment he was stable, Marcus, the man from the burner phone, a man who, it turned out, owed Vincent his life, had him transferred. They were spirited away in the dead of night to a hidden country house, nestled in acres of dense, rolling woodland, hours from the city. The house was old, made of stone and dark wood, with fireplaces large enough to stand in. It was a fortress of quiet, guarded by two of Marcus's most trusted men, who remained invisible at the property's perimeter. For the first week, Vincent did nothing but sleep. Delia sat by his bedside, a constant, silent vigil. She changed his bandages, spoon-fed him broth, and read aloud from old paperbacks she found on the shelves, her voice a low, steady murmur in the quiet room. She watched the color slowly return to his face, the shallow, pained breaths deepening. In those first few days, she was his nurse, his protector. The dynamic had been shattered and reformed. He was no longer the all-powerful boss, the untouchable predator. He was a man, vulnerable and wounded, his life held in her hands. On the 8th day, he woke up, his eyes clear and sharp for the first time. He watched her as she dozed in the armchair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, her face pale with exhaustion. He reached out, his hand still weak, and brushed his fingers against her arm. She jolted awake, her eyes wide with a residual panic that had not yet left her. "Vincent, are you okay? Do you need water, pain medication?" He just looked at her, his gaze soft. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice rough. "I told you," she whispered, her hand covering his. "I'm not leaving." As he healed, their world shrank to the confines of the house and the sprawling, overgrown gardens. The dynamic shifted again. They were no longer protector and victim, nor nurse and patient. They were just two people. Equals, learning to breathe in a world that wasn't trying to kill them. He taught her how to play chess on an old, hand-carved wooden board. She, in turn, taught him how to cook, or at least how to follow a recipe without treating it like a tactical operation. They took slow, short walks in the garden, his arm at first draped over her shoulder for support, and later, resting familiarly around her waist. They talked. For the first time, they truly talked, not about cartels or corrupt cops or traitors. She told him about her childhood, her dreams of being an artist, a life she thought had been ground to dust by the reality of the rusty nail. He told her about his father, the weight of the name he carried, and the crushing realization that the empire he had inherited was a cage he had never known how to escape. But the past was a ghost that still lingered. One afternoon, Delia was sitting on the porch, staring at a small scar on her hand. Vincent came out, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and sat beside her. "You're thinking too loud again," he said, handing her a mug. She took it, her fingers tracing the warm ceramic. "I can't get the blood out of my head," she said, her voice barely audible. "The church, your blood, the men in my apartment. Luca, what happened to Luca?" Vincent was silent for a moment, staring out at the woods. "Luca's sister is safe," he said finally. "She's been relocated, given a new life. As for Luca, he made a deal, his testimony against Artie and the cartel's city operations, in exchange for a reduced sentence in a federal prison. He'll be an old man when he gets out. And Artie and Rivaldi? Gone," Vincent said. "The system swallowed them whole. The war is over, Delia. But it started because of me," she insisted. The guilt of familiar, heavy cloak. "If I hadn't been in that back room, if I hadn't taken that drive, if I hadn't grabbed you, none of this would have happened. You wouldn't have been shot. Luca wouldn't have betrayed you. Your whole world." Vincent set his coffee down and turned, taking her face in his hands. His touch was firm, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You were not the problem, Delia," he said, his voice low and fierce. "You were the one who stumbled onto a rot that was already there. Rivaldi was always ambitious. Luca was always weak. The cartel was always greedy. You didn't cause this. You exposed it. You were never the burden. You were the catalyst. You were the one who finally gave me a reason to burn it all down and a reason to want to walk out of the fire." He brushed his thumb across her cheek. his eyes holding hers. "You were never the problem," he repeated. "You were the answer." The next day, Marcus arrived. He was an older, impeccably dressed man with kind eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had seen it all. He and Vincent spoke for hours in the study, their voices low. When they emerged, Vincent looked lighter than Delia had ever seen him. "It's done," he said, walking over to where she stood by the window. "What's done?" "The Romano organization," he said. "I've passed control, everything. The shipping, the holdings, the other arrangements. I've signed it all over. Marcus will hold it in trust, dismantle the parts that need to be dismantled, and legitimize the rest. A large portion of the assets will be liquidated and put into anonymous funds. One for Luca's sister, one for the families of the men who died in the church." "And for you?" Delia asked. "Enough," he said. "Enough for a new life, a quiet one. The name Vincent Romano is retired. He died, a civilian victim, in that church." Marcus handed them a thick manila envelope. Inside were 2 passports, 2 driver's licenses, and 2 new birth certificates, William and Elena Davies. "Your new life," Marcus said, a small smile on his face. "A coastal town, quiet, obscure. A small cottage is waiting for you. The keys are in the envelope. The car in the driveway is registered to Mr. Davies. It's clean, untraceable." He shook Vincent's hand, then nodded respectfully to Delia. "Be well, both of you." And then he was gone. They were alone, with nothing left but a bag to pack and a future that was, for the first time, a complete, terrifying and beautiful blank page. That night, their last in the house was different. The tension of the last few weeks, the healing, the fear, the heavy decisions, had finally lifted. A quiet sense of freedom settled over them. They built a fire in the massive stone fireplace, the flames casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. Vincent sat on the thick rug, leaning against the sofa. Delia came and sat beside him, curling into his side. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. He was still scarred, his side tender, but his strength had returned. He felt solid, real. This was not the desperate, frantic passion of the warehouse, nor the possessive claim of the penthouse. This was peace. She tilted her head back to look at him, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers. The kiss was slow, impossibly tender. It was a kiss of equals, a kiss of survivors. His hands moved, rediscovering her not with hunger, but with a quiet, profound affection. He held her face, his gaze tracing her features as if seeing her for the first time, without the shadow of death hanging over them. She leaned into his touch, her skin alive, her body feeling safe in a way she never had before. There was no rush, no fear, just the crackle of the fire, the sound of their breathing, and the slow, gentle comfort of skin on skin. He held her, his arms a safe harbor, their bodies close, finding a silent, intimate language that spoke of trust, of healing, and of a future they were finally free to choose. It was a quiet, profound, and final claim, a mutual surrender to a love that had been forged in violence and was now reborn in peace. In the morning, they walked out of the house, carrying a single suitcase between them. They didn't look back. The drive took 6 hours. They crossed state lines, the landscape changing from dense woodland to open fields, and finally, to the wide, gray-blue expanse of the ocean. The air changed, growing heavy and sharp with the smell of salt. Will pulled the car onto a gravel path, stopping in front of a small, whitewashed cottage. It was simple, with a weathered wooden porch and a view that looked out over the endless water. Elena stepped out of the car. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She walked to the edge of the low bluff, staring out at the waves crashing on the sand below. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who slung beers in a dive bar, the one who cowered in an alley, the one who signed forms she didn't understand. She felt like a different person, a stranger from another life. She'd been running for so long. She took a deep breath of the salt air, and she realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that she didn't have to run anymore. She felt him come up behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood together, watching the sea. "No one owns you now," he said, his voice soft, close to her ear. "Unless you want it to be me." A tear slipped from her eye, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. She smiled, turning her head to look at him, her hand covering his where it rested on her stomach. "Only you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And only because I choose it?" He kissed her. A long, slow kiss that tasted of salt and forever. Together, they turned and walked toward the little cottage, their new life waiting. They were finally free, finally together. And for the first time in either of their lives, they were completely unafraid of what came next. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Delia and Vincent. We would love to hear from you. So please, let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss a new chapter. And finally, share your thoughts on the story. What was your favorite part? We love reading your feedback. Thank you for being part of our community.